am Alessandra Venturini, the holder of the Jean Monnet Chair in European Migration Studies. I am very glad today to open the final lecture of the second edition of the seminar Cocumint, Consumption of Cultural Goods as Driver of Migrant Integration. The seminar is interdisciplinary. It always starts with an artist. Last year we had Michelangelo Pistoletto. This year Marinella Senatore, who is a young, amazing artist, that introduced the field of the connection between art and inclusion. After we have economists, anthropologists, scientists, linguistic demographer, and also lawyer. And so today I'm very happy that we have Andrea Montanari, who is a lawyer. Andrea Montanari is a professor of private law at University Mercator in Rome. He teaches private law and private art law. He's also he introduced the first course for junior students in this field, and he teaches this also in many other universities, especially in the postgraduate courses of the University of Milan, Siena, Palermo, and Brescia. He's also specialized in, so he concentrates his research in many fields: artistic performance and civil law, the acquisition and the perverse possession of work art. He has been part of project preserving historical building with the University of London and political science. But just to make short the presentation, he's very well known. He is among the founder of this scientific journal, Art and Law, published by Geoffrey Lefebvre. So I don't want to take more time. Let us give the floor to Andrea Montanari. I think that I well interpret the subject of his presentation, which is crowdfunding and art possession, art properties, and so on. Andrea, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Alessandra. And first, okay. First of all, I have to say thank you to Professor Alessandra Venturini and to the University of Turin for inviting me at this seminar. Okay. To start, let me explain the title of this seminar. What is the aim of this seminar? What is the connection between crowdfunding, cultural goods, and social inclusion? I'm a jurist, a private law scholar, and from my perspective, the connection between cultural good and social inclusion brings to my mind the forms of support of cultural goods in favor of cultural goods. From this point of view, crowdfunding represents the most suitable tool to support cultural goods because it allows the active participation of people in the cultural life of the community to which they belong. This seminar aims to explain such assumption. So now we have to start from the notion of cultural good. The expression cultural good finds its origins in the Haia Convention of 1954 and then in the Franceschini Commission that was established by law in 1964, from which started the Italian legislative path that brought to the adoption of legislative decree number 42 of 2004, that is the so-called Italian Code of Cultural Heritage and Landscape. The introduction of cultural good. Here I wrote, cultural good testifies the history of the community to which it belongs. Let me explain this concept. The introduction of the expression cultural good involved the abandonment of the idea of protection based on a purely aesthetic interest, as it was instead in the laws made by the minister Bottai during the fascist era. Such laws, number 1089 of 1939 and number 1497 of 1939, based the protection on the rare beauty or particular beauty of things, in line with the nationalist idea of that time. With the concept of cultural good, we have embraced the idea of protection aimed at preserving the cultural interest that transcends the good merely considered as a thing. Thus, the expression cultural good means the aptitude of the thing to testify the history of the community to which it belongs. In other words, things are treated by law as in the sense that they narrate the history of the civilization to which they belong. This explains also the public interest in the protection and valorization of cultural goods, because the safeguard of cultural goods finds one of its aims in the cultural enrichment, that is the promotion of cultural identity, because without culture there is no identity. In this sense, cultural heritage can be considered as a synonym of cultural good. All of this leads us to recognize that cultural goods represent a value and not a utility. Let me briefly explain this concept. The consideration of cultural good from the legal point of view leads to the question on the utility emanated by cultural goods. So, which is such utility? What kind of utility they grant? Such utility cannot be intended in an economic sense, because cultural goods have, or should have, an exquisitely ideal and spiritual value. The cultural goods are not inserted in the materialistic and market logic, probably they move us to speak not so much of utility, but rather of value. Cultural good is a value. And this assumption leads us to explain the next slide. Yes, this is what I explained before, the concept of cultural good that testifies the history of the community to which it belongs, and that it represents a value and not a utility. Yes, okay, was.
Thanks.
Now we can look at the forms of support of cultural goods. So the issue of the support of cultural goods brings us to a classical distinction that I illustrate here in this slide. The distinction between, on the one hand, activities carried out for profits. For example, sponsorships. Sponsorships that are ruled by the Italian Code of Cultural Heritage that I mentioned before. And on the other hand, activities exercised for no profit, that is exercised in an altruistic manner. For example, one example for all, donations. I think that this form of support appears more in line with the notion of cultural good that I explained before, because it fully considers it a value and not a utility. This assumption brings out the distinction between the egoistic interest and the altruistic interest that lead the person to act. Sponsorships aim to achieve utility by definition. From the perspective of cultural good, the altruistic objective achieved by sponsorships is merely complementary respect to the one of profit. Donations instead find their motive in the altruistic interest of people and don't consider the cultural good as a thing to make profit. Now, I start to explain the connection with the phenomenon of crowdfunding. Once we have clarified the greater adherence to the notion of cultural good of non-profit forms of support, now we start the explanation of crowdfunding as the most suitable tool to support cultural goods. More precisely, in this context, I mean those forms of crowdfunding carried out through donations. These are donation-based crowdfunding, reward-based crowdfunding. Donation-based crowdfunding is merely based on the liberal act of donating, and reward-based crowdfunding envisages that the donator obtains a non-financial reward in return. A typical example, to remain in the artistic field, is an invitation to the preview of the exhibition support. These forms of crowdfunding represents two forms of support exercised in a purely altruistic manner that favor the participation of citizens to the cultural life of the community without distinction of wealth. This point, I think that is probably the most important one, because it allows us to emancipate the forms of patronage from their elitist vision. Crowdfunding, in fact, allows us to enlarge the scope of the discourse on people's participation in supporting the cultural life of the community to which they belong. This is the social inclusion. An example can very well explain this assumption. It relates to the construction of the pedestal of the Statue of Liberty in New York in 1883. Joseph Pulitzer launched a newspaper campaign to take small donations from citizens in order to finance the construction of that pedestal. Such a campaign overcame all other funding attempts focusing on people's sense of belonging to the community. People could donate even only $1, obtaining a mention in the newspaper as a reward. Crowdfunding in the contemporary era is a financing technique that is becoming increasingly widespread, mainly exploiting the internet, which allows to raise funds from all over the world. In Italy, also, crowdfunding gives access to tax benefits that are represented in the artistic field by the art bonus, which envisages the recognition of a tax credit of 65% of the donation made to support public cultural goods. Crowdfunding gives access to tax benefit also in case of equity-based crowdfunding that aims to support utilitarian activities, for example, startups. Some technical points. Crowdfunding starts from an open call implemented through the internet. Internet first allows a wide diffusion of the initiative, reaching people in every corner of the world. Second, it ensures transparency of information. And third, as a consequence of the first two, it favors the social control of the initiative. So such open call aims to collect funds for a specific project through the accumulation of small donations. Crowdfunding calls people to support a specific project that consists, in the context of Interest Us today, in a plan to protect and valorize a cultural good. Now, let me explain the connection between crowdfunding and social inclusion. Donation-based crowdfunding and reward-based crowdfunding enhance the aptitude of the donation to create relation between people. Therefore, to foster social inclusion. To explain this assumption, we can refer to, on the one hand, the perspective of anthropological studies on the gift that illustrate the aptitude of the gift to generate social relations and to lay the foundations of community. One of the most important studies that explain this assumption is that of Marcel Mauss. Here I mentioned it, Essai sur le don, forme et raison de l'échange dans les sociétés, I don't want to, archaic, I don't know if it is correct, of 2007. From the legal, on the other hand, we can refer to the rules on the donation envisaged by the Italian Civil Code. The donation is not considered as an isolated act, but rather is considered in the context of the social relations that it generates. Just think, for example, of the rules that aim to prevent that donation alter the rights that the law grants to heirs. So, this said, we also have to take in consideration the social cultural value of the donation because the donation highlights the bond of belonging to the community, social relations not created by the market nor by utilitarian interests. So, in this sense, a donation permits to bring social relations on a significantly different level from that of the market and utilitarian logics that have characterized modern law. A level that highlights the sense of identity, of belonging to a specific community. So, the connection between crowdfunding and the concept of cultural good that I explained before allows me to say that crowdfunding activates the virtuous circle, according to which contribution and awareness of one's own identity feed on each other. So, crowdfunding favors social inclusion around the cultural life of the community. So, I repeat, crowdfunding enhances the sense of belonging to a specific community. So, to conclude, I I can conclude with an answer. Why should we encourage crowdfunding as the most suitable tool for supporting cultural goods? So, because crowdfunding realizes the participation of people in the cultural life of the community in which they live, because the connection between crowdfunding and donation, in fact, fosters social inclusion around the cultural life of the community, because crowdfunding releases an additional social value compared to the support of cultural good for profit. I think that this is the most important reason to prefer this form of support of cultural goods instead of the others exercised for profit. Because because it realizes social relations that are not only market relations. This does not mean, I would like to make clear this assumption. This does not mean, on the other hand, that the support of cultural goods carried out for profit should be despised, but simply that legislation should encourage an increasingly widespread phenomenon that can bring greater gains from the point of view of social inclusion, fostering in citizens the sense of belonging to their community. So, this means at a strategic level that it needs an action of the state capable of stimulating the awareness of citizens of their belonging to a community from which they receive and to which they can give. All these should encourage people to support the cultural life of the community, regardless of the economic return. In other words, it is necessary to overcome the logic of do ut des, which instead seems to be the basis of the incentive policies for the support of cultural goods. In other words, when I listened at the on the discourses of on this kind of topic, I always heard about what I can grant to the companies that support cultural goods. I think that this logic is that we have to abandon this kind of logic because we don't see the gain that we can achieve through the support of cultural goods exercised in an altruistic manner. And I think that from this perspective, the crowdfunding is the most suitable tool for all of the reasons that I said. So I have only to say thank you. I don't know if I
We
was too
thank you,
short.
Andrea. We thank you, Andrea, for this presentation, which is really on the point of
Okay,
this.
thank you very much.
I think it's very important and we liked very much your lecture because this seems really a solution. However, I have a little bit some doubts, as you can imagine. I'm an economist, I'm not a lawyer, so it is not enough for me that the principle remains. So we all agree, all the public agree that the crowdfund make people feel in part. But in your slide, there was a note that attract me your attention, the control. For instance, if I give money to La Stampa, who is an Italian newspaper that is doing a lot of social action, that, for instance, sending money to Ukraine or poor or doing benefits, I have a past experience that they are always very effective. It's not only that they are honest, but they are able because the ability is also very important. So my question, I don't know if you want to collect questions also by the other participants, but I think that while if there is a catastrophe, people feel emotionally involved and they try a trustable agent and they give money to the trustable agent. In this field, I wonder how they can control, because the example that you made of the basement of the Liberty statue was very specific.
Mhm.
Many times in field of arts, the objective is not so specific. And you remember the lecture of Can We Vote Art? The idea is that the citizen can influence the art product with crowdfunding is something similar to voting arts, voting something specific. You want a monument or you want a square, something like that. So I imagine that you have made some reasoning in this field, and I would like that you share your thoughts with us. I don't know if other participants has other questions that they want to raise now. Yes, Viola. Viola Zangirolami, she is, yes, she is the person which is producing artistic events. So she's very much in the field. Viola, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Very interesting. And I have a question that goes for some aspects in the same direction of the one Professor Saventurini just asked. I was wondering if in your research you noticed any remarkable exclusion of some social groups because of the online nature of the crowdfunding. For example, I was thinking that some people might not trust the platform launching the crowdfunding campaigns, or I was also thinking to all the elder people that cannot easily access the media usually involved in this kind of phenomenon, which is typically developing online. And I was reflecting on this aspect because in the Western countries, the average age is increasing and there are more and more old people still involved in many social dimensions, but nevertheless excluded from the hegemony of the new media. I'm thinking about my grandfather. He's 100 and perfectly self-conscious, how can I say, but it would never take part in a crowdfunding. And like him now, we have many ones, right? So I have this curiosity. Thank you.
Yes.
And Roberta Misuraka.
Yes, I have also a question. So, you have talking about the possibility that crowdfunding improves the cultural assimilation of people, but honestly, I did not understand which is the cultural transmission channel in your idea, because I think that I imagine that a good channel is, for instance, the presence of different people in different places, but I don't know which is the connection between the crowdfunding and the possibility to improve the cultural integration of different people. Thank you.
Andrea mentioned not assimilation, no? Only inclusion, which is
Inclusion,
a first
yes.
step. A first step. Assimilation
yes.
is really
Yes,
very
it's different.
advanced. He meant inclusion, feeling part of a community, so which is the integration assimilation
yes,
stage.
you're right. Maybe I tend to consider assimilation and inclusion as synonymous,
At the same
but
level.
is not correct. Yes, thank you.
Correct.
It's not going so far, Andrea Montanari.
Okay. Thank you for the questions. And okay, I try to answer. Okay, I think that there's one element in common that is the social control about crowdfunding. And I think that this is one of the most important issue. But I think that crowdfunding implemented the implementation of crowdfunding through the internet grants a lot of the social control, because we have also the so-called feedback about the platforms, so we know such platforms are serious. I don't want to make examples, and we can control if the specific project is achieved effectively. So I think that internet from this point of view granting transparency of information on the using of funds, on the feedback. So I'm quite sure that internet can cover this possible gap. More difficult is the question about the old people. Or yes, because it's true they are not used to use internet. And yes, we can imagine a campaign carried out by internet and also in the real life, but yes, probably is utopistic because we lose the social control and etc. Probably the only way is to provide for education, provide all people with education on the internet or with some tutorial, probably. But a part of this issue, I think that crowdfunding can foster social inclusion. I think that the example of the Statue of Liberty that is at the origin of crowdfunding shows very well how the social inclusion is strong. In that period, there was a lot of attempts to to found funds in order to for the construction of the pedestal, and instead the call made by Joseph Pulitzer had an incredibly success. But why? Why? Because he focused on people's sense of belonging to the community. And from this perspective, I think that crowdfunding activates that virtual circle that I mentioned before between the people's own identity, the awareness of people's own identity and the contribution, because I contribute because I am a part of the community and I have this feeling, and this feeling is incentivized by crowdfunding. And on the distinction between people, I think that it can crowdfunding can take every people, because there is
Yes, Andrea, if I can make a comment on this, you are absolutely right. Crowdfunding is very democratic, so that you can just give a euro. But the problem is not the method, is the objective. What you for what you ask money. For instance, I imagine that we are a migrant community of Moroccan, or you are a migrant community of Nigerian women. If you want to fund a theater or something like that, the Moroccan community who are not used to theater will not participate because they don't think that this part of their own culture that they want to share. So what I wanted to stress, that is a fantastic instrument that can be used only if you find an objective, an identification project which identify everybody.
Yes, that's why I said.
Viola want to say something?
Yeah, and I actually agree. And probably my question was also not correctly asked. I was thinking about people in general that might not access the might not even meet the call to action, right? Because, for example, these communities you are talking about, most of the times are very busy in doing other things. They don't even know that you're asking for funds first. And also, as Professoressa Venturini is saying, we might. I mean, to answer a little bit to what Professor Venturini said to your commentary, I was thinking that probably it's not we're not none of us is questioning the method because the method is great, and if it was working for the Statue of Liberty, I mean, it's also possible to disconnect it from the internet, so it's not about doing it online, right? But right, am I right?
Yes, sure.
There
You
was
can
no
do door by
internet
door,
in
everybody.
1883.
Exactly, right.
Sure.
Okay, so now we are developing it online, but it could be done in any other way. For example, when there's a there's a earthquake, and we get the possibility to send messages donating €2, right? Or to Amnesty International. Sometimes you get the chance to do it by via other media. What I'm thinking is that we probably should do some work before launching the crowdfunding. For example, you work with a community in the neighborhood where you have the Moroccans and the Nigerians and many old people, may probably also poor people that cannot access some media, and then you work with them about the importance of having a theater, having a park, having something. You work with them, you build some trust in your activity, and then you launch the campaign. So this is which is what, for example, my organization does. We work with people, asking their needs, putting together suggestions. And then we say, so what about doing it? And then you can maybe ask €1 each. Why not? So no one is questioning, I think, the crowdfunding because it's actually brilliant.
It's fantastic, yes.
Yeah.
And the result is the inclusion of everybody, but you have to work a lot on what you crowdfund, on the project.
Indeed, I said that at a strategic level, it needs an action. For me, it needs an action of the state capable of stimulating the awareness of citizens of their belonging to a community.
Of the state,
I
of
mean,
private agent, benevolent
yes.
association.
Yes, this aims to a changement, a big changement in the mentality of the society, in a society more altruistic, more oriented toward altruism and not only towards utilitarianism. We have, in fact, for me, to invest on crowdfunding is also represents also an investment in the society, because you to achieve a good result, you have to work on the awareness of people of their belonging to a community from which they receive theater, cinema, buildings, park, gardens, all of things, and to which they can give, because public is not something different from what I have. Yes, to not think at public as something of stranger.
Yes, exactly.
Something that it not belongs to me.
Yes, but the problem is that there is the system. We need the governance to prepare people to the governance
Yes.
or institution, private actor, benevolent association, or politician, political institution, as you said, that prepare because the instrument is there, is very effective, and but we is not used enough, I think, because there's not been enough effort in the pre-phase.
Yes, but
In the preparation phase.
because I think that the discourses that I heard on this topic are too much oriented towards utilitarianism. What I can give to the company to obtain support of cultural good. What I can
Yes,
give.
probably you live
What
in
I can
Milan.
give a company. I want to bring people to contribute $1, €1, 50 cents. Okay, and in the example of the Statue of Liberty, they used the newspaper, because
Yes.
Joseph Pulitzer at that time was the
The
owner
editor.
of the newspaper. Joseph Pulitzer of the Prize is the same.
Yes. Okay, Andrea, thank you very much. Your research topic is very, very challenging, crucial for our field of research. Thanks for all the stimulating debate, and I hope to see you again next year for the continuation of the seminar with other speakers. We'll invite you as discussant. We will have other lawyers, so we keep on this debate on the laws that affect the art inclusion field, in which we know very little. We have a lot of other discipline, economists, anthropologists, sociologists working on this, but we didn't open our door to the lawyer, and we discovered a very interesting and challenging debate. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your journal and for